Finally, the Alienware 360Hz OLED has graced our sweet lips and is here to put LCD esports monitors in the grave once and for all. But should you actually buy one, or does it fall far short of our grand expectations? Well, let's find out by taking a look at the Alienware AW2725DF, which was purchased thanks to all my Patreon supporters, and this monitor is a 2560 by 1440 360Hz 26.7 inch 16 by 9 Gen 3 quantum dot OLED, which means yes, it should have less issues with color fringing and hopefully better burn-in protection, but only time will tell. A 0.03 milliseconds response time. Yes, it's Gsync and Freesync compatible, and yes, it comes with an HDR 400 True Black rating, meaning this should be an excellent monitor when it comes to HDR. Now, it does also come with a stand that this time around is excellent. I think this is a huge upgrade over the 4K model, as it's far more compact and it does allow you to move it and turn it in any way you'd like. Now, in terms of the ports, here you go. I'll flash it on screen, pause if you need to, but the most important part is, in my testing, it does look like the HDMI port is not functioning properly, as it will limit you to 144 Hz, so you will need to use the DisplayPort 1.4 with display stream compression to get the full 360 Hz, so that is a little bit of a shame, but it gets the job done. Now, it also is base mount compatible, and in terms of the overall design, I would say it's actually very excellent. I like the colors and everything about it, actually a lot more than the 4K model. Now, it is a flat monitor and not curved like the 4K one was, so whether you like flat or curved, you'll have to argue with each other in the comments. Now, in terms of the price, comes in at $895.49, and although that is a pretty high price point for a 27-inch non-4K monitor, I will say that overall that's a very competitive price, as most of the 240 Hz OLEDs have been kind of sitting between $750 to $1,000, so this is going to be basically killing a bunch of those monitors unless they drop in price, assuming this display works as intended. And does it? Well, let's find out by starting off with the color, and my first impressions are it's quantum dot OLED, so it is excellent. All the colors really pop off the screen thanks to the glossy finish and no white subpixel. Now, in terms of the actual calibration, as you can see, the sRGB is a little bit messed up, and that is actually a huge deal, as the native color gamut and gamma of Windows is sRGB, so this is going to be what you're looking at for the majority of the time when you're not gaming. And the 2.2 mode does seem to be a little bit over brightened and a little bit unbalanced, which is unfortunate to see, but the good news is, guys, it's actually, I think, just mislabeled in this case, as it seems to be following the sRGB gamma curve, which is totally fine for professional editing. So that's actually not too bad, but I was able to actually improve upon it and calibrate it to the 2.2 gamma curve, which I do know many people prefer. So if you do want access to that, as well as all my instructions to get the best picture out of this display, I will have that linked in the description below in my Patreon, and that will also get you access to the Discord. Now, in terms of HDR, here you can see out of the box, it is pretty messed up here, although the HDR Peak 1000 mode is far more accurate. However, unfortunately, something happens when you move it over to that mode where it actually gets far less bright overall in exchange for giving you those higher peak highlights. So I actually found that the custom color mode is both accurate as well as far brighter than the Peak 1000 mode, and I would definitely be using that, and I will be personally. Now, in terms of the color volume, both in SDR as well as HDR, as you can see, DCI P3 over 100% and BT 2020 is close to 71 to 72%. So that is going to give you some pretty good color for HDR. Now, in terms of the brightness, this is very, very important for HDR impact and just general usability, and the 100% window is the most important metric. Now, the good news is this is one of the brightest OLEDs I've ever seen. However, I will mention that I do still feel like it's not quite as bright as I'd like to see personally. Mini LED definitely still has a huge advantage in that department. As you can see at the bottom there, the KTC M27T20 is far brighter at over 1000 nits, whereas this is at 278 nits. So yeah, it is going to be bright enough, I think, for most people, but not as much as I'd like. Now in a 10% window, once again, it's kind of near the middle of the pack, 480 nits, not too bad, but I would actually like to see this closer to 1000 nits in the future, and I do think that would help out greatly for the overall brightness of the display. Now, in terms of an actual game, here you can see, yes, indeed, it can reach nearly 1000 nits at 959 nits, which is pretty good to see out of a desktop monitor. And since it's OLED, it can actually reach a total of 0 nits, meaning you get infinite contrast, allowing for a really great image in HDR. But now let's talk about latency and motion performance, as this is going to be the prime reason you're going to be buying this display. Now, I got great news here because this is probably the fastest display I've ever measured, coming in at around 23 milliseconds of total system latency, and that is really excellent stuff if you're going to be playing competitive games. But what about the motion performance, as this is actually, I'd say, arguably more important. And as you can see here at 360 Hz, this is absolutely incredible. I have never seen motion this clear ever before, and that does include some really high refresh rate 360 Hz monitors with the new NVIDIA Pulsar as well as Diac Plus. I just think that the response time of OLED is so far superior to LCD that no matter how much black frame insertion you use, it simply won't be able to match up to really high refresh rate OLED performance. I mean, take a look at that 360 Hz result, guys. It looks pretty close to the example image there on the left, and that is pretty wild to see. This is really something else, and something that you kind of just have to actually use to fully understand. Now at 240 Hz, as you can see, it's not too much worse. Honestly, I think that 240 Hz is kind of the sweet spot overall, but yeah, 360 Hz is an improvement. And then we do have at 120 Hz, it does start to get a little bit blurry there. So as you can see, definitely better than 240 Hz OLED, and it absolutely smokes something like a mini LED monitor. Now, in terms of the text clarity and subpixel layout, this is using an RGB subpixel layout, but unfortunately, it's arranged in a triangle fashion, which means that sometimes you are going to see either red or green tinting on the edges of objects. And as you go lower and lower in resolution, it becomes more and more obvious. And unfortunately, that is definitely an issue on this display. It was less of an issue on the 4K model, but at 1440p, I would say it's very obvious and it can be distracting at times, making it less clear and a little bit annoying. Now, in terms of the finish and overall perceived clarity, I'd say it's good. It is using a glossy finish, which is far better than any matte display on the market, as those things just look hideous all the time. And there's basically nothing you can do to make a matte finish monitor look good outside of buffing it out. Whereas on these displays, as long as you're in a light controlled room, they do look pretty good. But there's something really funky about these particular glossy displays where they just really handle ambient light very poorly. Any amount of ambient light put in front of them will light the entire screen up a magenta color, so I do highly recommend having these in a light controlled room to get the best contrast and the true blacks out of these displays. So I would like to see in the future monitor makers move towards a glossy finish that is something like Gorilla Glass, that has far better ambient light handling while still having all the benefits of a glossy display, which includes better perceived contrast and vibrancy, as well as far better clarity than the god-awful matte finishes that we've been used to seeing on awful LCD displays. Now, in terms of the viewing angles, it's actually excellent. Quantum.OLED is probably one of the best display technologies ever created when it comes to viewing angles, so don't worry about that. But the uniformity actually surprisingly wasn't quite as good as I was expecting. It seems like there's almost a little bit of vignetting on the four corners of the display. And in terms of the difference in brightness from corner to corner, I did measure a maximum difference of 53 nits. So it's not amazing, but it's not terrible in terms of the uniformity. Now, in terms of the menu and usability of this display, I think the menu is actually really great. It has a lot of options, but it is a little bit buggy. There's some stuff that doesn't quite work right, and sometimes with multiple displays, it can be a little bit funky, but overall, it's way better than the 4K monitor from Alienware that I just reviewed. The 4K OLED at 240 Hz, that thing, honestly, I was way too nice on that thing in my original review. The firmware is a disaster on that thing. It is so buggy, it's borderline unusable for some professional work, so thank God that is not the case on this monitor. A huge improvement, but it does have some issues. Like I mentioned, sRGB 2.2 mode somehow equals sRGB gamma, so mislabeled it seems like. As I mentioned, the custom color HDR is basically the only accurate bright HDR option. It does have imperfect SDR emulation in HDR, but it is pretty close. It has a ton of fringing, it has poor ambient light handling, and it does have a little bit of flickering on some low gray windowed applications from time to time. So this is definitely not a perfect display, and like I mentioned earlier, I would like to see brighter OLEDs in the future when that becomes possible. But overall, I am going to say, despite the fact that it's not a perfect display, I actually do highly recommend this model, whereas on the 4K one, I definitely had some concerns. But on this one, it's just got insane speed, excellent color, good clarity, great contrast, decent brightness, a one-stop, pretty accurate mode for both HDR and SDR, and overall, it's just much, much better than their 4K version, and it's just far less buggy. And honestly, this is going to absolutely destroy basically every single other esports monitor on the market. But because it does have some issues, I will warn you that despite the fact that I am recommending this, there is a good chance that other monitor manufacturers could come out with their own versions that just simply don't have any bugs at all. So I'd highly recommend getting subscribed and waiting for my other reviews from people such as MSI, Gigabyte, Asus, and many others before making your final decision. Whether you're looking to connect a new console, gaming PC, or just need a fast and reliable HDMI cable to connect over long distances, Rupro has you covered with their certified 8K HDMI 2.1 fiber optic cable available in sizes of up to 50 feet and can deliver a perfect full 48 gigabits per second connection over distances other cables could only dream of reaching. And with 48 gigabits per second of bandwidth, it can easily drive 8K 60 FPS or 4K 144 FPS 10-bit HDR video through its ultra-thin, flexible, and durable housing, and it even supports ER. So if you're in the market for a cable that can drive a beautiful new TV or monitor, be sure to check out Rupro on Amazon today.